Be centered and grounded with your feet flat on the floor. Take a deep breath in through your nose, now through your mouth slowly. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Let go of anything and everything that didn't serve you today. Let go of everything and anything that triggered you. As you breathe in and out, in and out. And as you let go of any tension, any stress, anything that might be lingering and can hinder you from this moment. And as you take another deep breath in and let it go, just join us again in the room. And thank you for taking the time and for breathing with us and becoming centered for the next 30 to 45 minutes. Welcome to the Transforming Lives panel podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sharmin. And of course, Mitzi's here with me today. And we have a guest. But before I introduce my guest, how are you, Mitzi, and how are you, Dr. Ingegno?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you've been pleased. Tom is fine. I use the doctor title when it gets me somewhere, but
Dr. Tom does.
Oh, yes. Well, that's the fascinating part. So, well, Dr. Tom, Unlocking the Secrets of Ancient Healing. Dr. Tom owns and operates City Integrative Health, a multifaceted clinic, NYT bestseller, and futurist David Hall called the future of medicine. His clinic provides multidimensional approach to reducing inflammation, improving circulation, and regulating the immune system to help people thrive. In addition to nearly a quarter century of clinical experience, Dr. Tom has taught at 2 universities of East Asian medicine and served as the chair of the Maryland Board of Acupuncture. He was the director of acupuncture for a chain of wellness centers in Mid-Atlantic, and Dr. Tom has been featured in both customer and professional media, spreading his message of health using modern research, traditional practices, and humor to make complex theories and treatments understandable. His professional passion is to help patients and like-minded practitioners develop no-nonsense practices to allow people to maximize their health. Dr. Tom, welcome. Is there anything you would like to add?
oh my God, first of all, I could listen to you all day. I love your accent. I absolutely love it. I'm just so happy to be here. I love when I'm on a show, and one, I don't exactly know what I'm getting into anytime I enter a show, but when we do some breathing, some breath work, some grounding, literally the second you said that, I kicked off my shoes and put my feet on my grounding mat. I sit in this exact spot and meditate every morning. So it's kind of nice to be called back to that right before I do a show. So thank you so much for that.
You're very welcome. You are welcome. So, Dr. Tom, thank you for being here. Can you share with us initially drew you to the field of integrative health and East Asian medicine?
Yeah, this is one of those things that I think, the pieces started to come together long after I was already licensed, right? I didn't know the forces that were at work before this, and I don't even know how to describe it. I was going to be a doctor, was the idea. I was going to be an MD, right? And I just wanted to help people. But there were so many little events that kind of turned my path just ever so slightly that it kept repositioning. And the next thing I know, I'm an acupuncturist and, my doctorate's in East Asian medicine. But one of the big things was, my grandfather was a pharmacist and he was counting out pills once. And I was helping him out in high school and, cleaning shelves and stuff like that at the pharmacy. And he said this guy has to pay $5 a pill for each one of these. He's got to take 3 a day for the rest of his life. The guy happened to be a migrant worker where he was getting like day labor. He wasn't making much money. And my grandfather looked at me and he said, there's got to be a better way, and I hope you find it. And that kind of got buried in the back of my head because he died like a year after that. And I didn't think about that until college. And I might have already been in grad school when that happened, when I remembered it, I should say. But I was pre-med in my undergrad, and my junior year during that Christmas break, I got a postcard in the mail for an acupuncture school, an East Asian medicine school. I went to the open house and I was signed up 2 weeks later. And, I feel like so many things happened just like that. I mean, even in my undergrad, there was a Tai Chi class that just kind of like, well, that's a weird, letter to get stuffed under my dorm room. Okay, let's sign up for that. And we had an East Asian philosophy class. So here I am learning about Taoism and these principles of balance more than anything else, more than the actual, because this way of thinking was all based on balance. And when we talk about that system of balance, it wasn't just in medicine, it wasn't just in martial arts, it's in art, it's in music, it's flower arranging, it's their calligraphy, it's how they write. And it's so entrenched in that culture that even if you ask people from China that, like they know it's there, but they don't consciously think about it, right? We have this concept of qi that we translate to energy here. And it's translated as something mystical, but it's meant to be something very physical, very practical for them. To the point where even when they're asking about the weather, right? They use the word qi. What's the energy of the atmosphere? So it becomes a very practical, hands-on thing. And I think those principles of balance based on thousands of years of observation of natural things really drew me in, because at the end of the day, I don't care how evolved we are, how smart our phones get, how great the technology is. We still exist in a natural environment, and we're living, breathing things that sometimes forget that we're part of that, right? We put ourselves at the top of the food chain, but in our heads, we're not even part of the food chain. Yeah, and I think that's fundamentally wrong. And I know before we kind of got into it, we were talking about some of my services. God, if we were just outside more, I think we can knock half my services off the list. And that's not saying I want to go out of business, but the red light therapy mimics those early morning sunlight. The salt therapy is like being at the beach, right? The hot therapy, the cold therapy. Well, go outside in the different seasons and you'll get exposed to those. And at some point, we forgot that we do that, right? We go from our air conditioned house to our air conditioned car to our air conditioned job and then back home. And some days we do it without even seeing the sun, right? We get up super early, we come home after the sun sets, and we're not part of that. So to be able to I don't want to say artificially give people that, but give people that boost that they're missing tends to put them back on the path to health. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer there.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction and for explaining so many facets of what you do, and even sharing your personal experiences that led you there, the Tai Chi
Hmm.
invitation under your door, all the different invitations that were indicators that this is the path that you should go, and you followed the path closely. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have a question for you because I've tried, from what I'm looking at, several of the therapies. And so when you sort of first meet with a client,
Yeah.
and you're sort of assessing their health and everything, sort of what's the process that you go through, and sort of how do you decide which of the different modalities or whatever are the appropriate one for that particular person at that particular time?
Well, when we talk about, I'm gonna back this up, Mitzi. That's a great question, by the way, because it sounds very complex. But we try and make this as simple as possible. I'm an acupuncturist first and foremost, so I'm always going to lean on that. And most people that come through us, even though like half of our business is non-acupuncture, acupuncture is still our flagship service. It's still our mainstay, and I think it reflects kind of everything we do there in one kind of thing, because it addresses so many different complaints, and it has this systemic effect as well as a symptomatic effect. Now, if somebody comes in and they tell us what's going on, we know certain conditions tend to lend themselves better to different services. We also know that people have some pretty visceral reactions to certain things. If I say, here's our cryotherapy, it takes you down to negative 184 Fahrenheit. That's the starting temperature. And somebody goes, oh, I hate the cold. We're going to back off. We're no. Okay, we want to reduce inflammation and restore circulation, but how do you feel about heat? Oh, I like that. Oh, well, then we start with the sauna. It also depends on what level their issue is at, right? We recently had somebody that was coming in with some really bad eczema, and the underlying condition was a little bit weirder than a lot of the other ones. We immediately said, well, we think red light. And she goes, oh, oddly enough, I'm in a support group that only talks about red light for eczema. And she started using that. So when we talk about the buzz term now is evidence-based medicine, right? That's where everyone's trying to shoot, right? We want some actual studies. We want this and that. And they hear those like, oh, it's got to be studied, right? Yes, we want studies, but evidence-based medicine doesn't just stop at good studies. It counts on the practitioner's experience as well as what the patient's desire is, right? So you have this Venn diagram with those three circles where those three overlap is in that little like triangles piece is real evidence-based. So having that conversation with the patient about what do you want out of the treatment? What are you looking for? What do you like? What don't you like? Okay, well, here's the services that we think in an approximate order of how we would administer them is what we recommend. And then, depending on what the patient says, I want to do this, that, we have some patients that like throw it all at me. Those are the fun ones, because then we can move them through service to service and they'll go, well, I really like that one. This one, not so much. Okay, well, then let's alter that treatment for them on the fly. And because these services all play well with each other, there isn't a, well, you can do this and not that. The goal was also to be safe as well as effective. And because of that, we really try and move people through in a way that respects what they want to do as well as plays into what we know the research says and our experience with the equipment.
That was really helpful to sort of understand, because as you mentioned, there's like so many different modalities and they all help and then balance each other and kind of intertwine. And it's sort of like, okay, where do you choose to start? I know many years ago, like in 1993, I was in a really, really bad car accident and was in excruciating pain. And I was trying, massage and a variety of different things. And I was afraid of needles. And so I was like, the acupuncture was not the first thing I tried.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally it was like, you know what? Like, I'm ready to try anything. Like I was like in so much pain. And I remember so distinctly, the first few treatments, I didn't feel a big difference, but I so remember like around, I think it was around the 10th treatment. And all of a sudden I experienced being pain free for the first time in 2 years. And it only lasted for 15 minutes that first time. But like my body had literally forgotten what it was like not to be in pain 24/7.
Yeah.
And I remember that massive awakening feeling of like, oh my God, like there's hope.
Yeah, and that's an important point there too, Mitzi. Depending on the severity of the condition, depending on the underlying causes, depending on how long you've been suffering, all of our services, they're not magic bullets, they're not surgery, they're not drugs. The idea is we have to elicit that healing response from you. So, I'm sorry it took 10 treatments, but there is this kind of undoing. Restoring function to that area takes some time. Believe me, if we could do it faster, we definitely would. And for every person that comes in and has some kind of miracle experience, and that does happen, I have more people like you where it's like, well, you saw my friend Todd and he came in once and now his back pain's all gone. And it's like, well, Todd is 20 years younger than you. He's in good shape. He didn't get hit by a bus. He sprained his back at the gym. So they're very, you have to explain to people that everyone is individual and everyone has some healing potential, but how much that is going to depend on the condition, the severity of the condition, and that person's innate overall health. And you have to set up practical and understandable goals for people, right? We see some people that have had multiple surgeries, and look, this leg has been operated on 10 times, and it's like, well, look, is it ever going to be textbook perfect? No, I can't promise that. Can I get you more function? Yes. How much? Sometimes I got to be honest and go, I don't know yet. We're going to need to see you a few times to see, if we're fighting tooth and nail to get a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, whatever that plateau is, whatever we get you might be all we can get you. And then sometimes you get it right. And like that, look, I got this break and it was so much better for that amount of time. And it might only be fleeting, but that gives us hope. That gives us something to build off.
Oh yeah, I know. With me, it's like that. As I say, it was around that 10th one that I got that first 15 minutes. But then what happened is the next time I went, it was like I got like an hour where I wasn't doing it, and then and it really from that point on, it really accelerated. And it was like probably after 15 treatments, it was like, oh my God, I'm having days without pain. Like it was like so exciting.
One thing that I love seeing is when somebody comes in and they might have a cane or a walker, and they don't necessarily make it out of the office, but they make it to the front desk and they're like, did I have something else? And you're like, yeah, you left it in the room. I joke that I should sort of pile of that, right? We don't always see pain. We see a lot of internal conditions too, a lot of anxiety, depression, a lot of chronic autoimmune disorders. But when you see something tangible like that, where it's like, oh, you're no longer using this and it's external, right? Everyone can see it. That's super cool. That really gives people hope.
Thank you so much. I am loving this because I really believe in alternative medicine. You spoke earlier about evidence-based practices or studies. Are there studies on your modalities that you use in your clinic?
Absolutely. So if we start with acupuncture, which once again, first and foremost, I'm an acupuncturist. It has more studies, systematic reviews in the Cochrane database. It's one of the major places. PubMed's another one. Then physical therapy and chiropractic put together. Now, I refer to both of those. I'm not talking down about them. But those two, or should I say acupuncture has been so studied, initially it was to try and disprove it, right? Oh, this is all like Chinese folk medicine. It doesn't have any. Well, one, it was never developed like that. It was never done in households. It was always done by physicians. But two, all of these studies are reinforming, right? They may not be using the Chinese classical terminology, but they said, well, not only is it working, we don't understand why. So they started looking at the systemic functions that happen. So now we have some vocabulary that we can use here in the West that doesn't take away from all the traditional terminology, but it's more friendly to people that don't grow up in a system where they learn about chi and energy and these kind of things on the regular. And it was never meant to be a mystical thing. That was something that the West kind of put onto it, right? Like, no, this is just how this works, and you're making it weird, man. But we can't, you don't get to control the narrative sometimes when it comes out. Now, other things that we do there, when I was picking services, I had to see some studies, right? They didn't need to be necessarily, double blind, placebo controlled, 100,000 human studies, but there needed to be enough evidence and there needed to be enough documentation on the physiological effects. So even red light therapy, I think it started sometime it's been 50 years almost that they've been doing studies on that. Even the cryotherapy, right? That was invented in 1978. And specifically, the Japanese physician that invented it was looking at a way to reduce inflammation for rheumatoid arthritis. And he said, well, if we hit you with cold really quick, we can rapidly reduce that inflammation. So he published a big white paper, probably in the mid 80s, on that. And then research built after that. Now, of course, it had to get over here. And Mayweather, actually, it was the first time I saw it when he was fighting Pacquiao. But that was probably in the early 2010s that I first saw it. And then it kind of came this like giant wave where it went up, and now it's kind of, people are now replacing that with cold plunge, which we also have, because they want a different hit. They want to feel something different. But all of these things have been around for a little bit longer than people think, just because they haven't heard of it before, right? But the studies were there, the evidence is there. Even cupping, cupping is older than acupuncture. And when I was writing the book, I got to see, like, we don't exactly know exactly where it came from. We know it was written about in Egypt in 1515 BC, but they had to have been doing it for a while before they would write it down, knowing, like, you're not going to document something that's garbage. It takes a while to carve into stone or write on papyrus or these kind of things, or carve into bamboo tabs like they did in China. So you're really, judicial in what you decided to actually write formally. And this made the cut. And today we have, within the last, I want to say 5 or 6 years, several systematic reviews showing that cupping definitely helps with musculoskeletal pain, especially neck and, low back pain. And I think a lot of the other uses that we do traditionally, they'll hold up if we actually invested the time and money into studying them, which is like respiratory health, digestive health, and just overall stress. A lot of the things we do, they play with the autonomic nervous system. That's your fight or flight versus your rest and digest. So some of them are going to be pretty stimulating, but what that's trying to do is trigger you to get into that relaxed mode. And others are super relaxing, so they're trying to pull you out of fight or flight, which is all like, balance, that yin and yang that we talk about in traditional Chinese medicine.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, what you do when you have cupping? Because I think a lot of people might not be familiar with what cupping is, and also, as you say, what it's supposed to do when you have cupping done.
So cupping, and in my clinic, we do traditional fire cupping. In my book, I want you to use silicone cups or pumps or some method without fire, or glass, so you're not breaking anything, not burning anything down, or suing me. But within that, what cupping does is creates a vacuum, right? So you create a vacuum in a jar, a cup. Traditionally, those would have been buffalo horn or bamboo sections or clay pots. And you create a vacuum and you stick that to the surface of the skin. Now, when it hits the surface of the skin, it pulls the skin up. And it pulls the skin up enough where you're creating some space between the skin and the fascia. And then the fascia gets pulled up and it creates some space between the fascia and the muscle. And what that does is it pulls a bunch of blood through there. You're creating a little local inflammation. And because you're pulling all this fresh blood through that, you're nourishing that tissue, as well as getting some of the metabolic waste out of that tissue that might be stuck in there, for lack of a better term. Now, when you take the cup off, that suction has ruptured some of those capillaries below the surface of the skin. So the area looks darker, red, purple in a lot of cases. But the real key, that initial relief that we get from that, is up to 6 inches into the body, we increase circulation of blood, right? So we know old blood out, new blood in. New blood has oxygen and nutrients. Old blood has metabolic waste, inflammatory markers, those kind of things that we want out of that tissue to promote healing. So in a very savvy way, thousands of years ago, they know that if we increase circulation to an area, we gave it a better chance to heal.
Wow. And I'm saying wow, because I don't remember, Mitzi, I don't know if you remember, but I'm from South America in Guyana.
Yeah.
And we have a tradition, whenever you're having abdominal pains, they call it Nara. And they perform a cupping ritual that, until today, I used to think that it's something mystical, because no one can give me an intellectual explanation like you just gave, or a medical explanation. Just what you do around the belly button, they would actually light a piece of cotton, they would put some rice in that, tie it, and then actually put fire to the top of the cotton. Then they will take a glass, a drinking glass, and put it over that lit cloth with the rice. And magically, there is a part of the belly that sucks into the cup, and there is automatic relief. And you just give me an explanation for it, because I usually say it's mystic.
Yeah. I'm so glad you told me that. And because when I was teaching this, and I was teaching in Manhattan, we had so many international students, right? They're there to go to the acupuncture program. When we got to cupping, every one of them would say grandma used to do that. And sometimes it was very ritualized. And there was always a little bit of variance. Like in Italy, they'll put down a coin, and then they'll take a piece of cotton soaked in some high proof alcohol, and they'll light that on fire and then put the cup on. And it's always slightly varied. Now, one of the other very cool things to me, in South America, around the same time as the rest of the world doing cupping, they developed something called Ventosa. So vent is like the root word to suck, which is exactly what they would do. Now, we don't know, because like we lose a lot of things to history, whether or not somehow somebody from this side of the world got to that side of the world before we were supposed to be over there, or it was this mutually developed idea. And Sharmin, this is something that I become more and more passionate about as I'm trying to read we have a textbook we call the Yellow Emperor's Internal Classics, and it's not a Bible, but we refer to it as the Bible of Chinese medicine. We had so much writing before that. They're referenced in other texts, but they were all destroyed by warring states, and one group takes over, they destroy everything before it. So we've lost so much. And sometimes it was destroyed because it was associated with a religious practice or mystical experience. But now we're seeing that, like, even if it is a mystical experience, there may be actual tangible benefits to it. I got to see the guy once before he passed away. It was sad. He was young and healthy. We're not sure what happened, but he was actually lecturing and talking about not playing down the placebo effect, because certain rituals convince people that it's more important, right? And if I can convince you that you're feeling better, you know this. I've changed your brain. I changed how your mind is working, and you believe it, and you get better. So not to be a snake oil salesman, not to sell somebody something fake or lean into hope that's not there. But if I can make you start to think you're getting value out of this, and I'm doing it ethically, then that's okay. And a lot of these traditional practices, regardless of their country of origin, they start to sound similar. And the number of times I've read something about Native American culture where I'm like, okay, so before Taoism in China, there was this group called the Wu, and they had these dances, and they played drums, and they chanted, and you're like, what original culture didn't do that? And how similar are they all? And what would they do? Oh, they do it for different seasons. They do it to get rain. They do it to have a good harvest. And there were certain things about human conditions around the planet that were all, slightly different language, different culture, but the same things that they were doing. And when we look at that now, and we're looking at it through modern science, and we're looking at it without the cynicism, and we start to go, yeah, we can study this. And you know what? They weren't some weird primitive culture. They may not have been able to explain at a cellular level why this works, but they were able to go, we know this works. Yeah, and that always blows my mind. In that same textbook in Egypt, they talk about nose reconstruction, and they did it almost identically to the way we do it today. It's insane. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there. Thank you for indulging me.
No, but you bring up a great point, which is, the things that existed in the past that we lose sight of or we didn't know about because of our limited experience. I remember when I went traveling, we went to Ephesus in Turkey, and I get there and they have these bathhouses and they show how they would move these big boulders and it would then flush the water down to wash it all out, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I always thought of toilets and modern plumbing is so new, and look at this, thousands and thousands of years ago they had a system that did this, yet because of limited travel, was oblivious to that. And these types of healing rituals, techniques, it's the same type of thing. And you so eloquently describe sort of what happens within the body when you do the cupping. Because like Sharmin, it's like, I tried it and I knew that it worked, but the person couldn't explain to me why. And you did a really, really good job of sort of explaining what the physical thing that was happening in the body was.
Yeah, I think some of it is, sometimes there's a language barrier. I'm not the most common looking acupuncturist, let's say that. And then sometimes it's just, even in school, we don't necessarily learn it this way. We learn about it traditionally, and then it's kind of left there. So, I like the question why quite a bit, right? And I'll never say anything against the traditional practices, but if I can inform them through modern research, if I can understand them at a deeper level, I want to. And I don't think that negates the classical stuff. I think it just informs it in a different way. So now I can talk about it and more people will understand. And that's always been a very important part of what I do, because the number of times I've had an acupuncture patient come and lay down on the table and they'll go, well, what's happening? And that's the big thing, right? And it's may not, is this going to work or it's not? It's like, what are you doing and why? Right? Because, and if I can give you, I don't have to sit there and give you a master's degree education in acupuncture, but if I can explain this through concepts that make sense to you, you're more likely to be more relaxed with what I'm doing, more comfortable with what I'm doing, and you're going to have better experience. So, especially when people have been in from other acupuncturists, I normally say something like, I'm going to explain this like I tell people. If you don't want to hear it, you just want to lay down, that's fine, I'll shut up. But more often than they're not, they're going to say something like, no one's ever said that before. And it's not that I'm inventing new concepts or doing anything. It's just I'm telling you at a level that hopefully is not condescending. I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. I'm saying, look, I went to school. I studied this for a long time. I still am constantly reading, and I'm barely scratching the surface. So if you're coming in and you've only had maybe a couple of acupuncture treatments or no acupuncture treatments, and you're just there because your friend told you to try it, and you don't know anything, that can be scary. That can be uncomfortable. But if I can give you that information that makes it less foreign, less mystical, once again, not trying to negate the quality of it, but to make it more relatable to you, you're more likely to have a good experience.
To that end, can you explain what goes on within your body when you have acupuncture the same way as you did with cupping?
Yeah. So this one I can actually talk quite a bit more about, because there's this crazy cascade of effects that happen. And this is part of the reason why when somebody says, well, what is acupuncture good for? And a lot of us will say, well, just about everything. We're not lying. We're not trying to oversell the medicine. First and foremost, acupuncture was developed to treat a person as a whole being. And I'll say a living being because we treat animals too. But the overall arching effect, when we look at it through modern lens, right? The classical concept is we have these meridians that flow up and down the body, and there's this energy called chi that goes up and down the body. Now, interestingly enough, chi, the character for chi, is a rice grain and vapor. And the thought is we make energy from the food we eat and the air we breathe. So that's the two representations within that character. If we have good food and our body's doing what it's supposed to do, we have ample energy to have, all of our bodily functions, our mind and spirit are calm and clear, and that chi flows through those channels. Now, if we have a metaphysical, an emotional, or a physical trauma or something, or an experience that's negative, we alter that flow of energy. And normally, if it's not too big, our body rights itself. But if it's constant, let's say we grow up in an unnurturing household, or we have an accident, or something is wrong even in our genetic code, that starts to get expressed through those channels and those points, and that's where the disease manifests. So classically, we'll say all disease is first rooted in spirit. Now, by the time you get to me, chances are you probably have some physical symptoms. But when we put these needles in, the idea is that we're trying to control that flow of chi to normalize, to allow that body to heal. So we're not actually treating a disease. We're not actually curing. We're looking at a collection of signs and symptoms that this patient is having and trying to alter that flow of energy to allow that healing. Now, from a Western standpoint, the number one thing we do, we didn't know this until we started studying it in like the 80s and 90s, is regulation of the autonomic nervous system. This is a hot button topic. You'll see the polyvagal theory book. You'll see, vagus nerve. You'll see fight or flight versus rest and digest, sympathetic, parasympathetic. It's all the same thing. What ends up happening for most of us, there are some disorders in which the parasympathetic is too strong, but most of us, we survived for thousands of years being afraid of things. I hate to say that, but that keeps you from grabbing a stick that might be a venomous snake. That keeps you from jumping into water that might be full of crocodiles that you can't see. That keeps you running away from the lions. Now, as we evolved, we have less and less things to run away from, right? Most of us are not in an area where we're in immediate danger too often. Our brain doesn't like that, specifically a part of our brain called the amygdala. Especially the left side of the amygdala loves to keep us in fear. Why? It keeps us alive. But what that happens is we end up saying things like, if I don't get this done, my boss is going to kill me. Well, our brain interprets that as actual fight or flight, life or death situations. So during that time, our blood vessels constrict, our heart rate goes up, we're not nourishing our tissue as well. And that starts off this imbalance. And that's where we can start seeing long-term diseases. That's where we start getting physical pain. After about 10 or 15 minutes of acupuncture, we flip that switch. We go into this rest and digest mode. All of our blood vessels open. We're getting more circulation to our intestines and our lungs. So we're actually making better chi. We're picking up the air, the oxygen, we're off-gassing CO2, we're picking up more nutrients. And then that's informing the quality of blood, which is then going through those blood vessels, which are opened up. So we have better blood flow. Now, other things that happen during this regulation of that fight or flight, our brain waves change. During an acupuncture treatment, we're making brainwave patterns that have high delta, high theta, and high alpha, which is the same thing that happens when we're meditating. So alpha is that concentration. Delta is that deep sleep. Theta is that sometimes they refer this as the monk state, right? Where all this kind of weird, deep stuff happens. Our neurotransmitters kick in too. So that's our serotonin and dopamine, right? So yes, anxiety, depression have external causes, but serotonin and dopamine levels being normalized, that's when we feel good. There's a neurobiology joke that says, technically, serotonin and dopamine are the only two things you like, right? Because those are feel-good neurotransmitters. We also kick out endorphins, which are naturally occurring. It's our body looks like morphine, right? So it's a naturally occurring painkiller. It makes us feel good. And in the 90s, we found out about the endocannabinoid system, which is compounds in our body that we make that look like cannabis. One of the main ones that's kicked out during acupuncture, and it bonds to both CB1 receptors, which are all along the nerves, including the brain, as well as CB2 receptors, which regulate immune system function, is called anandamide. Ananda is Sanskrit for bliss. So a lot of people leave the treatment and they'll go, look, I feel a little high. And you go, well, your brain is actually kicking out cannabis-like products, right? Because of this increased neurotransmitter production, because of this increased blood flow, everything has the ability to reduce the inflammation and heal from the inside. It also regulates our immune system. So we have cells that we should be fighting that we're not. we'll fight those. If we have cells that we're fighting that we shouldn't be in autoimmune conditions, we can tamp that response down. So we have this whole systemic cascade of things that are happening. And all you did was lay down and get some needles in. Now, I can't think of a more eloquent way to describe that classically than saying, well, I put the needles in, I restored the flow of chi, and now their chi is flowing smoothly and they're in balance, right? It's a super eloquent way of describing things before we had blood work, MRI, brain scans, the ability to look inside the body or even at a microscopic level. So once again, this is such an eloquent system for cultures that we would say, oh, this is 3,000 years ago. They didn't know anything. We had the same brains back then. We had the same brains 10,000 years ago. And we had free time to think about these things. I'm sorry. And I really thank you for indulging me and letting me ramble.
I don't think you rambled. You have the information, and I mean, it is needed, and your ability to explain every question that you ask. It's a testament of how invested you are in what you do, how serious you take that. And I'm so appreciative and honored to sit here and learn from you, because I'm going to be 58 in 2 months, and for 58 years I've been saying that that ritual for Nara is demonic and dark, and not knowing that it has medical explanation. I mean, that's gonna be my Facebook post in a few minutes.
Oh, please tag me. I have to say, I think there was so much wisdom that at some point we said, oh, those are shaman or witches or whatever. We lost so much because of our own ignorance. And they call it scientism when we're so heavily invested into the science, and they couldn't use Scientology because of L. Ron Hubbard. But the scientism where we're like, unless there's a study, there's no value. Unless there's, unless we did it this way, and there's like, there's the no, we used to sit and figure things out, and we really thought about things, and there was a method, and somebody would sit there and go like, how do I solve this? How do I help my tribe, my group, whatever it was? And like a lot of great things were, I think, dismissed or kicked to the curb because they were passed off as unscientific. And now we can come back and look at that. I mean, God, I gave a lecture to the Walter Reed Hospital system, and all I did was like, hey, look, this is going to be around Halloween. Let's talk about some icky, creepy stuff. And it was fecal transplants and maggot therapy and bee venom therapy and leeches. And every one of these doctors are like, yeah, we use those clinically. And I'm like, I know they're thousands of years old, and you used to make fun of them. That's the whole point. We had this traditional wisdom, and I can pull up 10,000 examples right now of modern day ignorance that, certainly we should know more now, or we willfully dismissed things that we know are fact. And thank you for the compliment as well. If I have any knowledge, if I have any passion, it was kind of bred into me by my mentor, and I thank him every day. He passed a few years ago, and I wouldn't be here. And I don't think anyone in my field gets ahead without having that passion and letting East Asian medicine kind of embody them, or vice versa. You kind of have to let it kind of consume you, and you just keep falling deeper in love with it the more you learn.
Yeah, I mean, you so eloquently explained so many things that I had questions about, and I'm so glad that we had you on as our guest. And as you were talking too, I was thinking about, I saw, I think it was like a 6-part series or something on the different blue zones, and how they've studied, these different cultures where, and they're, what they eat and what they do is not the same in all of them, but they've got the longevity in the thing, and they've sort of analyzed certain aspects and figured out things. And it really reminded me a lot when you were talking about that, sort of the history of the types of things that I had sort of heard him talking about in relation to the blue zones and those cultures.
Yeah, I think these are great things, because certainly, and that kind of speaks to all of this, right? It matches the culture. It's not a congruent theme, right? There's certain parts of that, right? The longevity, people have a purpose even later in life, right? So they, whether it's like watching the grandkids or the next generations, they're not kind of shunned. They're not stuck up in a nursing home. Some of them drink, some of them don't drink, some of them smoke, some of them don't smoke. Some of them eat fish, some of them never see a fish because they're up in the mountains. Some of them eat dairy, some of them don't. But it's this purpose, and I also feel like living in more harmony with like the natural environment, right? Like it's amazing to get a mango in Baltimore in December, but is it right? Probably not.
No.
But like tropical fruit, I'm a fan of, and it's kind of like this convenience that we have, right? That maybe not serving us, but like I don't want to give it up, you know. But like a lot of those blue zones, they're living with what they have around them, and they have a very strong sense of community, and everyone has a role, and everyone feels included. We're primates at the end of the day. We have a social society. We need that. And I think almost like we here in the States, I feel like we overshot with this American individualism that was never really us. No, none of us have gotten anywhere without family, without friends, without a community. We die pretty quickly if we're on our own for too long. And I think that's where like the humanity really lies. And I hope I'm not sounding too preachy, but one of my favorite lines out of all that classic Bible I mentioned before is acupuncture is the expression of humanity, which is why I think it fits here in the West, why I think it evolves with the cultures that it comes in contact with. So acupuncture in China is different than it was in Japan and Korea. And then as it migrated further out and technology changed, it didn't go away. It evolved and changed, right? The needles are thinner now. Why? Because we can make them thinner. Oh, now we have laser acupuncture. Now we hook the needles up to electric stim. Now we can stimulate with this and that and all these other things. So it's just that tapestry is just getting richer and wider, which is really the expression of humanity. It also speaks to the interaction between the practitioner and the patient, right? It took a little while for, like, I'm a transplant from New York down to Baltimore. It took a little while for them to accept me. But now that they have, I refer to myself as a native Baltimore. It's not a Baltimorean. I learned that the first few years I was here. But, the idea being, you reflect what's going on in your environment. You are a product of that. You're a product of the community you're in, and that's a beautiful thing. And that keeps this and most traditional practices alive. So I'm very passionate about that. I love that about this, and I love that, like, for somebody with ADHD, I've been in this field for 23 years, and I can't learn enough. I don't think it's a hyper focus, but there's always something else to learn. There's always another way to do this, and to be able to share that with the world is really a gift.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I know that on so many levels, you've helped people see all the different ways that they can have a transformation by looking into these different techniques. And you've so eloquently explained how they're beneficial to us and why they're beneficial. And I think really helped open people's minds up to exploring this if it's things that they had not heard about before.
And that's it. I think, my mission here is to, like, really present this stuff in a way that people can get. And I want more people doing these things because it's going to make them have happier, healthier lives. And then they're better for their community. They're in a better mood. And this is how we evolve as a species, So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And if there is anything you would like to leave with us and the listeners, what would it be?
Yeah, I'll give you my main web. Certainly, my backdrop here has this little QR code on this side. You can connect with me by scanning that if that comes up. But really, Charm City Integrative. Charm City is the nice nickname for Baltimore. Integrative is an attempt to make a whole unit work together, and that's with our services as well as with our people. So charmcityintegrative.com is my website where you can find out about me, my practice, my books. You can book me for podcasts, lectures, these kind of things. I really just want to spread this word because there's so much value in this, and it can help so many people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I know she's looking to try to figure it to stop the recording.
That's all right. Mitzi, what part of Canada are you from?
I'm in the Greater Toronto area.
Okay,
Ontario.
all right.
Yeah.
All right. I was like, I'm trying to, and Sharmin, I was gonna guess West Indies, and I was like, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be
You
wrong.
can tell I was from Canada by my accent.
Yeah, you didn't go full of boot, but I heard a little. I heard a little in there. I also there's a really irreverent show called Letterkenny.
Oh yeah.
I have watched like all 10 seasons at least 3 times.
You know what? I've never seen Letterkenny, so I'll have to check it out.
It is very funny. And speaking of accents, the hockey players have their own language, and
Yes.
it took about 3 seasons before I could even understand a word they were saying.
But if you really want to get confused, take a trip to Newfoundland. We don't understand a word they say.
They make a reference to them in one of the hockey games. They're trying to like make fun of them and call them out, and the guys start talking and no one understands them. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I had a great time, if you couldn't tell. And
as did we, and it was really, really informative.
Okay.
I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, sometimes I think I'm going too long, and I'm like, they haven't asked a question for like 5 minutes, and you're like, oh, you haven't shut up. It's like you got to shut your mouth and let them talk.
We like to just try and get the guests talking and sort of give little interjections, but you know they're here to hear you guys. So
okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. I hope it comes out good for you. Like clearly, whenever it goes live, my social media team will pump this out everywhere as much as we can. Do you guys need anything from me?
So
okay, great. All right, thank you so much.